Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. I was just doing my nightly reading of the official rules of Ultimate. 11th edition, of course. Would you like to read with me? Come, let us learn together. Now, obviously this is too big to actually read to you guys today, so I'm not going to. But what I am going to do is go over the basics of the game and the basics of the rules of the game and where we've kind of been going wrong in the game so far and where we can improve going forward in terms of making calls, knowing what to do when calls are made, etc., etc. So I'm going to start off by talking about the fact that, there's no referees in this league. We are self-refereeing each other. And so with that comes an air of responsibility about being honest about what actually happened, not being an idiot and making calls that aren't real, and not getting frustrated when the other team does that to us. Because if we know the rules, we can explain the rules and we could educate people about the game more. And at the end of the day, that's really what we want to be doing. So I'm going to go over the first very unorthodox thing that is a result of being self-referees, and that's contesting, right? So anyone can make a call, right? And to counteract that very powerful tool that we all have, we can contest pretty much every foul in the game. And contesting basically is our way of saying, you're wrong, it didn't happen like that, so let's redo it. As I go through these fouls throughout this video, I'm going to try and go over what happens if it's an uncontested call or if it is a contested call. Uncontested means that the person who called the foul is saying, yeah, I was wrong, I understand that now, let's just keep the game going. And contesting is when they say, actually, no, I think I'm right, and while we may not be in agreement, I'm still going to contest the call. And so usually the result of that is it goes back, but if it's not, I'll try and be explicit with that throughout the video. So I'm going to try and go through this by going through like a point in the game, starting off on defense, and thinking about like what the calls could be throughout that point and what the result would be if it was contested or uncontested, etc. So first one I'm going to start off with is actually the least important rule that I'm going to go over today, and that's offsides. Before the disc is pulled, both teams are not allowed to cross the goal line that they're lined up on, right? So we all do it. Everyone does it every single game. It doesn't really matter. It's not the biggest deal, but the rules do say, and in like big games, people might call it, not in this league, but in other places, people might start calling offsides if you ever do decide to play in the future. So just so you know, you can't cross that goal line before the disc is pulled on either team. And so that would be offsides. It's not really contestable. If it's contested, then it goes back and it's a repull. If it's not contested, then it just continues as the pull was. The next call I'm going to go over is stall. Stalling is what we all do. The minute you are within 10 feet of someone with the disc, you can start stalling them. That means counting to 10, and the T in 10 is if the person with the disc still has it, that's a stall. So you can't stall someone if you're further than 10 feet from them, and two people can't stall the same person at once. But if you are within 10 feet, you can start stalling a person if no one else has done that already. And if someone did and you're taking over for that person, you have to restart to stall. So you can count to 10, you have to be honest about it, you can't fast count, you can't count too fast because that's a foul that the offense will call, and we'll go over that in a second. So you want to be honest about how quickly you're counting, but you want to be firm, and you want to, make sure that if you say that T in 10 and you think that that person with the disc still has it, then it's a stall, and you have to yell stall as fast as possible and as loud as possible, Trey, not time, stall. So if it's contested, If the person with the disc thinks that, no, I did throw it before you said it, before you got to the T and 10, I threw it, then what happens is the disc goes back to that person you were stalling, and when they tap it in, or when play resumes, you start counting from 8, not all the way over. You start at 8 instead of 0. So you go 8, 9, 10 stall, if they still have it, obviously. So it only drops by 2. It only drops to 8, which is very important to remember, because I think there was a game where we tried to call a stall and then we started counting from the beginning, which is not fair. It has to be 8. I'll talk about fast count right now too. So if we were on offense, then if you're on offense with the disc and the person stalling you is going like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or starts accelerating near the end, which people often do when they get like near 8, they'll zoom through 9 and 10 to try and get you to stall. But if you call fast count, ideally before they get to 10, because they might get mad if they get to 10 and then you're like, oh, but it was a fast count, then they could just be like, oh, well, you didn't call it. But if it is a fast count and you want to call it, then you say to the person, fast count. And then they immediately slow down their count. If they don't slow down their count, you say it again, and the stall drops by 2 from wherever they were. So let's say that he was counting on you. He was like, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you say fast count. Then he goes 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and he starts speeding up again. And you say fast count again. If you say it when he's at 9, he goes back down to 7, and he starts counting again, much more audibly slowly this time. So that's the basics with like stalling and fast count and stuff like that. Now I'm going to go into kind of defensive and offensive fouls and positioning, because it can be really confusing. Basically, if you're on defense, it's very difficult for an offender to foul you when you're on defense, but it can happen, and it has happened before to us. And it's important to know your rights, basically, within playing defense. If you have your feet planted, it's kind of like basketball. If you have your feet planted and an offender runs into you trying to get the disc, or he comes into your space as you're moving to get the disc, it's a foul on him, not you, regardless of whether or not he falls over or not, because he's coming into your space. So Frisbee, the general rule with Frisbee is everyone is entitled to their own space, their own little bubble, kind of. And if you inhibit their movement within their space, it's a foul on the person who inhibits them, not the person whose space it is. So it goes both ways on offense and defense. An offender can foul a defender by coming into their space, by pushing them, knocking them, hitting them out of the way, if their feet are planted. And obviously, defender can do the same thing to an offender. And that happens much more frequently, but it still happens the other way, especially on like big jump balls. If they're running down, 2 people are going deep, defender gets there first, plants his feet, ready to jump and catch it, and the offender either comes into and pushes him from behind so he can't make the defensive play, or when the defender jumps, sweeps their feet out from under them. That's a foul on the offender, not the defender. So it's very important to know your rights as a defender, where you can be and where you should be, and not just giving it all to the offense. Like, the offense doesn't have the right of way all the time. Everyone's entitled to their own space. Now, if we're on offense, defensive fouls are much more frequent, right? So if you're going to catch the disc and someone knocks you from behind, if someone trips you, basically if a defender inhibits your path to the disc or comes into your space, tugs on your shirt, trips you, whatever, stops you from getting where you want to be, it's a foul on them. Unless they got to the spot first and you are then coming into them if their feet are planted. It's very similar to basketball in that if someone's feet are planted or if someone's in a space and you plow through them, it's a charge. It's not a foul on the defense. It's a charge on the offense, right? So, knowing your knowing like you have your own entitlement to your space. It's all very important. Now, as for uncontested and contested versions of that offensive or defensive call, foul call when you're like coming into their space, getting slapped, getting tugged, whatever. The general rule is that if it is a uncontested foul on the defense, so if you're on offense and a defender pushes you, knocks you, you call a foul, and they say, yeah, I think I did foul you, I'm not going to contest it. It's assumed that the disc was caught, and so you get to pick it up from wherever you would have caught it, and you just tap the disc in, you tap it against the ground, or you have the defender tap the disc. That's how play restarts. If there's ever a foul called or anything, you either tap it against the ground or the defender taps it. That's how play will restart, and it starts from zero. Everything just goes back to normal, but it's assumed that you caught it. If it's contested, the defender thinks, no, I didn't foul you, what are you talking about, whatever. Still a call, it still happens, it just goes back to the thrower, and the stall comes in either at the same stall or one less. You guys just kind of decide on a time for it to restart, and then the defender taps it in, or you tap it against the ground, and the play restarts. Now, if it's an offensive foul, if you're a defender and the offender hits you, and you call foul, if it's uncontested, it's a turnover, because the offender is saying, yeah, I did foul you, you had a good chance of making that defensive play, but I illegally contacted you, I illegally hit you, I pulled you, whatever. I'm not going to contest it, and so it's assumed that you made the defensive play. So it's a turnover, you get to pick up the disc, or whoever wants to pick up the disc can pick it up, and play resumes. If it's contested, if the offender's like, no, I didn't foul you, what are you talking about, if anything, you fouled me, yada, 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 then it goes back to the thrower. So very similar to a defensive foul. So that's what happens during a contested and not contested fouls on offense and defense. Now I'm going to talk about a few other extraneous kind of rules and things that are unconventional. Stripping, the rule with stripping is if you stop rotation of the disc and it is in your hands, if you stop the rotation, that is defined as a catch. So if someone then slaps it out of your hand, hits you from behind and you drop it, or just generally knocks it out of your hand, whether they hit you or the disc, you want to yell strip as loud as possible. And strip is actually one of the few calls that you can't contest. The person who strips you can't be like, no, I didn't strip you. A strip is a strip. And if you think that it's not, if you yell it out, it's kind of like a self-contested call. Like if you catch it and they knock it out and you call strip, but you realized maybe you were just going to drop it anyways, like they didn't make you drop it, you were going to drop it anyways, then you can kind of take it back yourself, but that doesn't usually happen. Usually if you call a strip, it is a strip, and you just get the disc and play resumes. The other thing I want to talk about is whether you're in or out when you catch the disc. Basically, the rule with that is it's kind of like, I think NCAA football, where one foot has to be in, and then as long as one foot is in when you catch it, you're in. But if you catch it and both feet are on the ground, both have to be in bounds, right? So if you catch it and one foot is in bounds and one foot is out of bounds, and they're both on the ground at the same time, that's called a straddle. You're straddling the line and you're out of bounds. And that goes for the end zone as well. If you're straddling the end zone, you're not in the end zone, you're out of the end zone. So by and large, you really want to make sure that if you're catching it near the end zone, you want to make sure you're trying to have just one foot on the ground, and you want to make sure it's in bounds, not out of bounds. And if both of your feet aren't on the ground, let's say you're diving for it, and you're going to land out of bounds or in bounds, it's whatever part of your body touches the ground first, basically. So if you're diving out and you catch it, and for some reason your hands hit the ground first and they're out of bounds, but your feet land in bounds, you're still out, because the first part of your body that touched the ground is out. Usually it doesn't happen. Usually the feet are always the part of your body that hit the ground first. But that's just kind of the rules. And lastly, in terms of making calls about, I didn't even talk about traveling yet. I should probably talk about traveling. Traveling is a call that got called against us a lot last game, and for the wrong reasons. They didn't know what they were talking about. They just kind of called it to travel. So to define traveling is whenever you catch the disc, you have to establish a pivot foot, right? Usually if you're a righty, it's the left pivot foot, and usually if you're a lefty, it's your right foot. But it's just like basketball after you stop dribbling, where you can't move that pivot foot anymore. And if you move that pivot foot, if you lift it up, if you drag it when you're making a throw or whatever, it's a travel. Very similarly to basketball. The exception to that rule is if you're running and you catch the disc, then you have to slow down basically as quickly as possible and then establish your pivot foot. But if you throw the disc as you're slowing down, it's not a travel. Now, there's a lot of gray area there. You can't just kind of keep running with it, assuming you're going to make a throw and then realize nothing's there and then just immediately stop running, because that would be a travel. You never stopped slowing down. You never started slowing down, sorry. So we want to call travels if we see that the other team are, when they're making throws, lifting up both feet or dragging their pivot foot to try and throw it around us. I don't think we'll probably call it that much, and teams probably won't call it against us that much. I just wanted to mention it now, and I wasn't even going to mention it in the video if it wasn't for that other game. But I'm going to mention it now just in case. If a travel is called, it goes back to the thrower. Or actually, if the disc is thrown, then and a travel is called. If a defensive play is made on the Frisbee that's thrown, the play continues and it's a turnover. But if an offender catches the disc, then it is thrown back to the person who made the travel, who traveled, right? So basically, if a travel's called, you have to make sure that wherever it gets, wherever it was supposed to go. Otherwise, it's a turnover. So that's the general rules. There's a lot, many more rules, but I just don't think they're really going to get called against us, whether it be for us or against us. The last rule that I could kind of conceive coming into play is a pick. So basically, if you're running to make a defensive play on someone, and someone, whether it be a teammate or someone on the other team, gets in your way, they inhibit your path to the disc, and they stop you from getting there, so the person that you're defending gets the disc because you were not allowed to get there because people were in your way, that's called a pick. And you want to yell that out as loud as possible. And the same kind of rules apply to picks as travels, where the disc has to get where it's going if it's thrown when the call is made. Otherwise, it's a turnover. So I don't want to go on too long about the rules. That's pretty much it. Let's just remember that, in these last 2 games of the season, to really be good and good-spirited about the rules, because now we know most of them. If you guys watch this and still have questions, please text us in the group chat. Let us know, because we really need to clear these up before we get to the final, before we get to the semis, and definitely before we get to the finals. Because if we're in the finals, we play the team that we think we're going to play. Knowing the rules is going to be really, really, really important. But that's all I have for you guys today. Let's just remember to be good-spirited, make the calls early and loud, and not be afraid to talk about it with the other team. Let's not get too hot-headed about anything. If they start making stupid calls against us, let's just take a deep breath. Remember that we can always contest, always do something retroactively to stop them from making these bad calls. And most importantly, we can try and educate them about the game that we're playing so that we can all kind of grow from the experience, right? That's all I have for you guys today. I hope this really helped. And I'll see you guys on Monday. Thanks so much.